At 20 years old, Joseph's life didn't fall apart in a dramatic moment. It collapsed slowly, then suddenly became unrecognizable until everything he owned, everything he was, and everything he could rely on fit inside a single object, an old sedan that stopped being a car and became a sealed survival capsule. There was no romance in it, no freedom on wheels, no journey, only compression, a shrinking world where each day reduced his options instead of expanding them. At night, when the city went quiet, he didn't search for rest. He searched for invisibility. He drove through empty streets, not to move forward, but to find a place where he could stop existing in plain sight. Every parking decision became a calculation of exposure. Light angles, building shadows, camera coverage, patrol frequency, everything mattered. He wasn't just parking a car. He was hiding a life. One mistake meant discovery. Discovery meant removal. Removal meant starting over with nothing. Inside the car, time stopped behaving like time. Sleep wasn't recovery. It was forced endurance inside a space that was never designed for human survival. He folded his body into the back seat, adapting to constraints that slowly rewired how comfort was even defined. Knees pressed into his chest, spine bent into the curve of the seat, muscles locking into positions that would normally cause pain, but pain stopped registering the same way. After weeks of repetition, the car reacted to every movement. Old springs creaked with even the smallest shift, turning silence into something fragile and dangerous. Even stillness felt loud in that environment, as if the act of existing inside it was already too much. But the real breakdown wasn't physical. It was environmental. The car became a closed biological system. His breathing had nowhere to go, nowhere to escape. Moisture accumulated slowly, invisibly, until the windows began to fog from the inside. Then condensation formed, then droplets, then streams of water running down the glass, like the car was sweating out its own internal pressure. Everything became damp over time. His clothes, his skin, the seat beneath him. Nothing stayed dry. And then came the smell. Not sudden, not sharp, but cumulative. A heavy, stale presence that formed layer by layer until it was no longer something he noticed. It was something he lived inside. Cleaning didn't remove it. It only delayed its return. $600 became the only structured element of his existence, not money in a normal sense, but a countdown disguised as currency. Every gallon of fuel wasn't transport. It was time extension. Every cheap meal wasn't comfort. It was functional survival input. Every purchase was a subtraction from a finite system with no recovery mechanism. One wrong decision didn't just cause inconvenience, it collapsed the entire structure forward into instability. At night, while the world continued operating normally outside the glass, he became aware of a simple, brutal separation. Life was still happening everywhere except where he was. Cars passed, people talked, lights moved through buildings, and he remained inside a sealed environment that no longer participated in that system. The land he eventually found wasn't a discovery. It was confrontation with abandonment on a structural level, a space so neglected that even neglect felt complete. Thick, overgrown vegetation formed a dense barrier that didn't just cover the land, it defended it. Blackberry vines had turned into a living wall, sharp, interlocked, and resistant to entry. Beneath that was a second layer of abandonment, broken glass, rusted metal, old tires, fragments of objects that had lost every function they once had. The ground was no longer natural soil. It was accumulation, compressed time made physical. Most people would have seen it as unusable. He saw it as unclaimed. Every day after that became physical resistance against accumulated chaos. There were no machines, No systems, no assistance, only direct force applied repeatedly over time. Roots pulled back against him as if the ground itself refused change. Thorn branches cut through protection and left marks that didn't heal before new ones formed. The work didn't progress in a clean upward line. It moved in cycles of exhaustion and continuation. Fatigue stopped being a signal to rest and became background noise. At some point, effort stopped feeling like action and became persistence without negotiation. And yet, every cleared section changed the structure of the space, not dramatically, but irreversibly. Order replaced disorder in small increments that eventually became visible transformation. Construction under a $600 limit meant complete abandonment of conventional building logic. Nothing could be bought for convenience. Everything had to be recovered from systems that had already discarded it. Wooden pallets became the foundation. Industrial waste transformed into structural material, but even waste requires work before it becomes usable. Each pallet had to be dismantled carefully, not broken, because destruction meant loss of value. Nails were extracted and reused. Wood was preserved whenever possible. Even broken components were reevaluated instead of discarded. Nothing had final status unless it was completely unusable. Materials came from different sources, disconnected from each other in origin and design. Windows had different sizes, different frames, different histories of damage and replacement. They didn't match and were never meant to, but instead of forcing uniformity, the structure adapted around them. The building stopped being a fixed design and became a responsive system. Every irregularity in material, force, and adjustment in structure, construction became a process of forced compatibility between unrelated fragments. Building alone removed all safety margins from the process. There was no second person to stabilize, hold, or correct. Every step had to be broken down into controlled sequences. Temporary supports weren't optional. They were the only way progression was possible. And then environmental pressure entered the system. Rain transformed every surface into instability. Wood absorbed moisture, weight changed, friction disappeared, tools became harder to control. The structure itself began to resist completion, but stopping wasn't part of the equation anymore because incomplete structure meant collapse. So work continued through degradation, physical, environmental, and mental, until the roof finally locked into place. And when it did, the system changed immediately. External chaos stopped entering the space. Rain no longer surrounded him. It existed above him. Separation replaced exposure. Inside the completed structure, space itself became a resource with strict limitations. Nothing could exist without justification. Vertical space was optimized first. Sleep was moved upward where heat naturally collected. Below that, functional zones were created: storage, cooking, work. Every object was assigned purpose. Insulation became a process of sealing reality out using whatever materials could reduce energy loss. The goal wasn't comfort. It was stability against external conditions. The most critical system inside the structure was heat. A small cast iron stove, restored from near destruction, became the control point of internal survival. Its installation required precision because fire inside confined space is not comfort. It is risk management. Chimney flow, airflow direction, and heat distribution